I woke up and the Apache woman I rescued was on top of me. Her motive chilled my soul. He was traveling alone, following a narrow dirt trail that wound between jagged rocks and sparse scrub. The sun had begun to dip behind the distant hills, painting the horizon in shades of orange and red, and he felt the familiar mix of fatigue and solitude that came with these long journeys. The desert was beautiful in its harshness, but also unforgiving. One wrong step or one careless night could make it deadly. He noticed something unusual as he rounded a bend in the trail. At first, it looked like a pile of rocks, but then he realized the shape moved slightly. Curiosity pulled him closer. As he approached, his heart skipped a beat. It was a woman lying on the ground, barely conscious. Her clothes were torn and dusty, and there were faint streaks of dried blood on her arms. She was breathing, but weakly, as though each inhalation was an effort. Her dark hair fell messily across her face, partially hiding her eyes, but the brief glimpses he got showed fear and caution in her gaze. Instinct overrode hesitation. He had faced dangerous situations before, but something about her vulnerability demanded attention. He knelt down carefully, speaking softly. "Are you all right?" he asked, though he already knew she was. She didn't respond, only blinked slowly and stared at him. Her eyes were sharp and alert despite her weakness. There was a tension in them, a cautious intelligence, and he realized she wasn't just injured, she was wary of him, measuring whether he was a threat. He surveyed the area around them. It was remote, and there was no one else for miles. The trail led to a small canyon nearby, and he knew he couldn't leave her there. She needed shelter, water, and food. He quickly scanned his surroundings and found a sturdy piece of cloth in his pack, which he used to fashion a makeshift bandage for her arm. Her breathing remained uneven, and when he tried to gently help her sit, she flinched. He paused, realizing that despite her state, she was still alert and cautious. It wasn't fear alone, it was a survival instinct, honed by whatever life had thrown at her. He decided to carry her back to his camp. It wasn't far, but the sun was setting quickly, and darkness would make the desert even more dangerous. She allowed him to lift her carefully, resting her head against his chest. As he walked, he noticed how light she was, almost like she had gone without proper food for days. Her body seemed fragile, yet her grip on life was strong. She wasn't going to surrender easily. Every few steps, she would glance up at him with those piercing eyes, assessing, calculating. He couldn't read her thoughts, but he sensed that she was not a passive victim. By the time he reached his small, isolated shelter, a modest wooden structure surrounded by desert brush, the sun had disappeared completely, leaving only the glow of twilight. He laid her down gently on a blanket he had spread on the floor. He moved quietly, not wanting to startle her. She looked at him again, her eyes sharp even in the dim light. "Don't hurt me," she said in a soft, cautious voice. Her words were almost a whisper, but the tone held both fear and warning. He shook his head quickly. "I'm here to help," he replied. "You're safe now." She didn't reply, only studied him in silence. He went to fetch some water, placing a cup near her lips. She drank slowly, almost as if she wasn't certain whether she could trust him. He waited patiently, observing every subtle movement. He had learned long ago that trust was not given. It was earned, sometimes over days, sometimes over years. And with her, it would likely take longer. As the night deepened, he prepared some simple food. He had been traveling with dried meat, bread, and fruit, enough to last a few days. He offered it to her, keeping his voice calm and reassuring. She ate cautiously, small bites, never taking her eyes off him. Her presence filled the small space with tension, but it was the kind of tension that didn't demand immediate action. It was a quiet, observant energy, like a storm hovering in the distance. He realized then that she wasn't just injured or scared. She was someone who had survived hardships he could barely imagine. Her silence, her careful movements, the way she scanned the room, all of it suggested that she had faced danger before and had learned to protect herself. It wasn't just physical survival, it was mental and emotional resilience. He felt a deep respect for her strength, even though he didn't yet understand her story. Hours passed. The desert night was quiet except for the occasional rustle of animals and the soft wind against the shelter walls. He kept watch, sitting nearby, ready to help if she needed it, but she did not ask for anything else. At some point, exhaustion claimed her and she drifted into a light sleep. Her breathing evened out, and for the first time since he found her, she looked peaceful. He watched her for a long time, thinking about the decisions that had brought them together. He reflected on why he had acted without hesitation to help her. It wasn't heroism, it was empathy. He had seen too much suffering in the world to ignore it when someone clearly needed help. And yet, he knew the desert had a way of teaching harsh lessons. Acts of kindness could carry unexpected consequences. Still, he couldn't turn back now. He had made a choice and he would honor it, no matter what came next. As he sat there, he felt a mix of anticipation and unease. Something about her presence was different from anyone he had met before. She wasn't just cautious, she was calculating, observing, and he sensed a depth to her that went beyond what he could understand in a single night. He wondered about her story, where she came from, why she had been alone in such a dangerous place, and what experiences had shaped the strength and caution in her eyes. He resolved to be patient. There was no rush to understand her or to gain her trust. He could only provide safety and hope that, eventually, she would allow herself to rely on him. And in that quiet desert night, with the stars stretching endlessly above, he made a silent promise. No matter what happened, he would protect her until she could stand on her own again. The night wore on and the desert around them seemed vast and empty, but inside that small shelter, a fragile connection had begun. It wasn't spoken in words yet. It was in the shared space, the careful glances, and the unspoken acknowledgement of each other's presence. The rescue was only the beginning, and he knew that the days ahead would test both of them in ways he could not yet imagine. But for now, she was alive, safe, and breathing, and that was enough to hold on to. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, casting a golden glow across the rugged landscape. Inside the small shelter, he stirred awake and glanced at the woman he had rescued. She was sitting up now, leaning against the wall with her knees drawn close, her eyes alert and focused. She had changed since the night before, no longer the fragile figure he had first found, but still cautious, measured, and watchful. It was as if she was testing him, trying to understand who he was and what his intentions might be. He offered her some water and a small piece of bread, speaking gently. She accepted without hesitation this time, though her eyes continued to scan the room, taking in every detail. He noticed the way she observed not only him but the entire space. She seemed aware of every shadow, every sound, and every object. It was clear she had survived by paying attention to things others might overlook. He admired her strength, but a small knot of unease formed in his stomach. There was something different about her, something beyond fear or caution. As the day progressed, he began simple chores around the shelter. He chopped firewood, cleaned the small area, and prepared food. She watched silently, occasionally asking questions about the things he did. Her voice was soft, calm, and deliberate. She didn't speak much, but when she did, it carried weight. Each question seemed carefully chosen, and he realized she was trying to understand him, not just as a helper, but as a person. He answered honestly, sharing what he could about his life and experiences. Despite his efforts to make her feel safe, he noticed subtle signs that she was testing him. She would move objects in the shelter, shifting items from one place to another, and then watch his reaction. She would leave the room suddenly and return quietly, observing how he reacted to her absence. It was not childish behavior, it was deliberate, a way of assessing whether he was predictable, trustworthy, or easily startled. He reminded himself to remain patient. Trust could not be rushed. The day was long and hot, but they managed to settle into a routine. She helped where she could, fetching water and carrying small supplies. He noticed how careful she was, moving gracefully and quietly, almost like she had learned to avoid drawing attention. He realized that her caution was not just a habit, it was a survival mechanism honed over years of facing danger. She did not speak about her past, and he did not press her. Words were unnecessary, her actions spoke volumes. By late afternoon, the heat of the day began to fade and the desert air cooled slightly. They both sat outside the shelter, watching the horizon. She remained quiet, but he sensed a curiosity growing in her. She asked about the animals in the desert, about the plants, and about the sounds that filled the air. He explained patiently, pointing out tracks in the sand, small creatures moving through the brush, and the ways the desert life adapted to survive. For the first time, she smiled, a small, fleeting expression that seemed almost foreign to her. He felt a small sense of relief. As evening approached, the mood in the shelter grew heavier. She became more introspective, sitting alone and staring into the fire he had lit. He noticed that she would sometimes flinch at sudden noises or movements, a reminder that her life had not been easy. He did not interrupt her thoughts but stayed nearby, providing a silent presence. In that quiet, he realized that she was slowly beginning to trust him, not completely, but enough to share the same space without tension. It was progress, small but meaningful. Over the next few days, the routine became more defined. They worked together to gather food, collect water, and maintain the shelter. She moved more confidently, no longer flinching at every sudden sound. He noticed small habits that revealed her intelligence and adaptability. The way she stored supplies, how she observed the sky to predict weather changes, and how she noticed things he had overlooked. Each observation reminded him that she was not just a survivor, she was resourceful and remarkably capable. Despite these improvements, he could not shake a sense of unease. There were moments when she would stare at him silently, her expression unreadable. He often caught her studying him, analyzing his reactions and behavior. It was not menacing, but it carried a weight that made him aware of the power balance between them. She was learning about him, and he knew that understanding was a form of control. He respected her need to assess her surroundings, but he also felt that she was keeping a part of herself hidden, like a secret waiting to be revealed. He decided to focus on practical matters to maintain harmony. He prepared meals, shared stories about the world beyond the desert, and encouraged her to speak if she wished. Occasionally, she would tell small fragments of her past, though they were always carefully chosen and incomplete. Each story offered insight into her life, but never revealed the full picture. He realized that building trust with her would be a slow process, one that required patience, understanding, and respect. One evening, as the sky turned shades of purple and pink, he noticed her standing at the edge of the shelter, looking out at the desert. She seemed lost in thought, her posture relaxed yet alert. He approached quietly and asked if she was thinking about something important. She nodded slightly and replied, "I have survived by watching, by waiting, by knowing what to expect, but here I am not sure what will happen." Her words were honest, reflective, and tinged with caution. He nodded, understanding her concern. In that moment, he realized that her trust in him was fragile but growing, like a delicate plant in harsh soil. As the night fell, he helped her settle inside the shelter. She accepted the arrangements without complaint, though she continued to move with precision and care. They shared the small space quietly, the fire casting shadows on the walls. He thought about the days ahead and how the dynamics between them might evolve. He knew that she was not just physically strong, she was mentally resilient, capable of handling challenges he might not fully understand. That thought both impressed and unsettled him. The following days continued in a pattern of careful cooperation. They explored the surrounding desert, searching for water sources and edible plants. She demonstrated surprising knowledge of the land, pointing out subtle signs that he would have missed. Her skills were impressive, and he began to rely on her instincts as much as his own. Their teamwork gradually built a silent bond, a mutual understanding that did not require words. He admired her intelligence and adaptability, even as he remained cautious about fully trusting her. Despite this growing connection, he never forgot the initial tension in her eyes. There was a reason she had survived alone in such a harsh environment. She had faced danger, learned to protect herself, and depended on her own skills to survive. He respected her independence and never tried to impose his authority. Instead, he focused on offering safety, food, and companionship, allowing her to decide how much to reveal and how much to keep hidden. By the end of the week, a subtle shift occurred. She began to ask more questions, expressing curiosity about his life and thoughts. She laughed quietly at some of his stories, a sound that felt rare and genuine. He realized that slowly, the walls around her were starting to come down, and she was beginning to see him as more than just a rescuer, perhaps as someone who could be trusted. Yet he also knew that this trust was tentative and could be tested at any moment. One night, as they sat by the fire, he noticed her watching him closely. Her eyes were intense, filled with questions she did not speak aloud. He felt the weight of her gaze, a reminder that their relationship was not simple. She was cautious, intelligent, and aware of the balance of power. He respected her need for vigilance, understanding that trust must be earned and maintained. In that quiet moment, he realized that the journey ahead would be as much about understanding her motives and instincts as it would be about providing help and support. He went to sleep that night with a mix of relief and anticipation. Relief that she was healing, becoming stronger and starting to trust him, and anticipation of the challenges that lay ahead. He knew that the desert had a way of revealing truths about people, their strengths, weaknesses, and intentions. And he also knew that her motives, though not yet fully understood, would play a crucial role in the days to come. The morning air was crisp as he woke to the soft light of dawn spilling into the shelter. The desert had a quiet, almost sacred stillness at this hour, broken only by the distant calls of birds and the faint rustle of small animals in the scrub. He turned to look at the woman he had rescued. She was already awake, sitting silently on the blanket, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Her expression was calm, but there was a sharpness in her gaze, as though she was studying him carefully, measuring something invisible. He rose quietly and began his morning routine. Water needed fetching from a nearby spring, and there were small repairs to make around the shelter. As he worked, he felt her presence behind him, steady and observant. Occasionally, he would hear her footsteps approaching or feel her shadow pass across the walls, but she rarely spoke. He understood that silence was part of her way of understanding the world, of assessing risks, understanding people, and learning who could be trusted. By mid-morning, he had finished gathering water and returned to the shelter, noticing that she had moved to the edge of the structure, watching him intently. He offered her a seat and some food, which she accepted without comment, her eyes still scanning everything he did. For the first time, he felt that her presence was not just quiet observation but a deliberate test. She was seeing how he reacted under normal circumstances, how patient he was, how he treated her, and perhaps even how he treated himself. They spent the day in careful activity. He showed her how to maintain the shelter, how to arrange their supplies efficiently, and how to keep the small fire going without it attracting unwanted attention from desert wildlife. She followed his instructions, sometimes doing them differently, sometimes asking why he chose certain methods. He realized that she was learning not just from him, but also evaluating his decisions, considering how dependable and logical he was. There was no hostility in her actions, only precision and attention to detail. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, he suggested they take a short walk beyond the immediate shelter to survey the area for food and resources. She agreed silently, moving beside him with a grace and alertness that was both impressive and slightly unnerving. Her senses seemed attuned to the desert in ways he had never experienced. She could spot tracks in the sand, notice the faint rustle of hidden animals, and read subtle changes in the wind. She moved as if she had been navigating this environment for years, though he did not yet know how much of her past she would reveal. During their walk, he tried to engage her in conversation. He asked about her life before she ended up in the desert, but she answered only in fragments, never offering the whole story. Each detail she shared seemed intentional, a careful decision about what to reveal and what to keep hidden. She spoke about surviving harsh conditions, navigating alone, and relying on her instincts, but she never allowed him to see her vulnerabilities fully. He respected this discretion. It reminded him that her caution had saved her life more than once. As the day wore on, the tension in the air grew subtle but noticeable. He could feel that she was planning something in her mind, though he did not yet know what. She began to move closer, not physically but mentally, observing him more intensely than before. She asked questions that seemed ordinary at first, about his routines, his travels, and his thoughts on the desert, but each one carried a hidden purpose. He realized she was mapping him in a way he had not experienced with anyone else. That night, he woke suddenly to a faint movement. At first, he thought it was the wind or an animal outside, but then he realized she was sitting very close to him, watching. There was no threat in her posture, no aggression, but an intensity he had never felt before. She leaned slightly forward, her eyes locking onto his, and spoke softly. "I am not as helpless as I appeared," she said. The words were calm, but they carried a weight that made his heart quicken. She was not warning him, not asking for help. She was making a declaration. He listened carefully, realizing that her statement was a revelation, a glimpse into the truth she had hidden until now. She explained that she had allowed herself to be found, to be rescued, not because she needed help, but because she had a purpose. Her survival had always depended on caution, observation, and control over her circumstances. Allowing him to aid her was a decision she had made deliberately, and now she was revealing that the balance of their relationship was shifting. Her motives were subtle yet chilling in their clarity. She had survived alone in the desert for a long time, and she had learned that trust and dependence could be powerful tools, if used carefully. By letting him help her, she had created a situation where he was invested in her safety, where his actions could be guided and tested. It was not malevolent. It was a calculated understanding of human behavior and survival. She was neither attacking nor threatening him, but he felt the weight of her intelligence and foresight pressing against him. He realized in that moment that the entire dynamic between them had changed. She was no longer a passive recipient of his care, but an active participant, evaluating him, understanding him, and deciding how their interactions would continue. Her presence was commanding, yet calm. She had the power not through aggression, but through knowledge, observation, and the careful management of trust. He felt a mixture of awe and unease. She had survived by being smarter, faster, and more aware than those around her, and now he was part of her test. The night stretched on, and he remained awake longer than usual. He reflected on the previous days, on her careful observations, her precise movements, and her calculated interactions. It became clear that she had allowed him into her life not out of necessity alone, but as a way to assess him, to see whether he could be trusted, and perhaps to determine whether he had the qualities she valued in a companion of any kind, someone who could survive alongside her if needed. He felt humbled and slightly unnerved by this realization. As dawn approached, she shifted slightly, giving him a faint smile. It was the first moment of warmth he had seen from her since their meeting, and it carried a complexity he could not fully interpret. It was gratitude, curiosity, and perhaps a recognition of his integrity, all at once. Yet he knew that this smile did not erase the fact that she was in control, quietly observing and evaluating him. She had chosen when and how to reveal her true self, and he had only glimpsed a fraction of her intentions. The next few days were marked by subtle changes in their relationship. She moved with confidence, sometimes taking the lead in decisions, sometimes allowing him to direct their efforts. Their interactions became a careful dance of observation, learning, and silent understanding. He realized that their bond was not built on traditional notions of trust, but on mutual respect and acknowledgement of each other's strengths. She had chosen to let him see part of her world, and he had chosen to respect it. During this time, he also noticed that she occasionally disappeared for short periods, venturing beyond the immediate shelter. She returned with small finds, edible plants, signs of nearby water, or observations about wildlife. He asked little, understanding that these excursions were part of her process of maintaining control and independence. She was not simply recovering. She was actively managing her environment, testing both her own skills and his reactions. Each return reinforced her self-reliance and reminded him that she was not to be underestimated. One afternoon, they sat together at the edge of a small ridge, overlooking a valley below. The desert stretched endlessly, a landscape of muted colors and rugged terrain. She spoke quietly about the ways she had survived, emphasizing observation, patience, and anticipation. He listened closely, realizing that her methods were precise, disciplined, and deeply ingrained. She was teaching him without intending to teach. Her words were practical, insightful, and carried a subtle lesson in awareness. He felt both admiration and unease. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert, he sensed a shift in her demeanor. She became quieter, more introspective, yet her attention to him remained keen. He felt the weight of her scrutiny, as though she were measuring his responses, his patience, and his understanding. He realized that their relationship had entered a critical phase, one where the balance of power, observation, and trust would determine how the coming days would unfold. That night, as he lay on his blanket, he reflected on everything that had occurred. She had revealed herself not as a victim, but as someone fully capable of managing her fate. She had allowed him to help her, yes, but only to observe how he would handle the responsibility, how he would respond to her independence, and how he would respect her boundaries. Her presence had become a test, a challenge he had to navigate with care, empathy, and awareness. He drifted into a restless sleep, aware that the turning point in their relationship had arrived. She was no longer the fragile woman he had rescued, but a formidable individual with her own motives, intentions, and intelligence. He realized that understanding her would require patience, humility, and constant attention. And though he did not yet know the full scope of her motives, he understood that the desert had brought them together not by chance, but by a collision of circumstance, resilience, and human will. The day began quietly, with the soft warmth of sunlight spilling into the small shelter. He rose early, performing the usual routine of checking water supplies, preparing a small breakfast, and tending to the modest shelter. She was already awake, sitting near the doorway, her eyes scanning the desert beyond. There was a calmness to her, but a sharp tension lay beneath, the kind that comes from someone who has spent years reading the world for danger and opportunity. He could feel it, an awareness so intense it was almost like she was looking through him, not just at him. They moved together through the early morning chores in a rhythm that had become familiar. She helped without needing instruction, anticipating what he would need and acting decisively. Her movements were confident, precise, and deliberate. He admired her skill and independence, but he also felt a quiet unease he couldn't shake. Over the past days, he had begun to sense that her presence was not merely passive. She was evaluating him, watching his reactions and measuring his abilities. He had suspected this before, but today the feeling was stronger, more focused. After breakfast, she suggested a walk along a narrow canyon that he had not yet explored. He agreed, curious about what she had noticed. As they walked, she moved ahead slightly, then paused, turning to observe him carefully. The desert stretched around them in all directions, silent except for the faint whisper of the wind over rocks and sand. She finally spoke, her voice calm but carrying a strange weight. "You've helped me," she said. "You've given me food, water, shelter, but do you understand why I allowed it?" He stopped, unsure of how to answer. He had assumed her motive was survival, simple and clear. Yet the question unsettled him because her tone suggested a deeper layer, something he had not considered. She continued, "I did not need saving. I allowed you to save me for a reason. And now it is time for you to understand that reason." Her words were deliberate, chosen carefully, and carried a gravity that made him realize this was a turning point. They sat together on a flat rock, the canyon walls casting long shadows across the sand. She looked at him steadily, and he felt an almost physical weight in her gaze. "I survived by relying on myself," she began. "I have lived alone without help, because the world is not kind to those who show weakness. But when I allowed you to aid me, I created a situation that tested more than just me. It tested you." He listened closely, his heart beating faster, trying to understand her meaning. She was not accusing him or threatening him, but her words carried a silent power. "You see," she continued, "survival is not just about physical strength. It is about judgment, awareness, and the ability to act under pressure. By helping me, you placed yourself in a position where your choices matter. Every action you take affects me, and every inaction carries risk." Her explanation sent a chill through him, not because of fear, but because of the clarity of her logic. She was intelligent beyond measure, and she had orchestrated their interaction in a way that tested his character, his patience, and his understanding. She had allowed herself to be vulnerable, not out of necessity, but as a way to measure him. The realization hit him. Everything up to this point had been part of a subtle test, a deliberate evaluation of who he was and whether he could be trusted. He asked cautiously, Why me? Why choose me?" She smiled faintly, though it did not reach her eyes. "Because I needed to see if someone could act without expectation, without reward, and still make the right choice. You acted because it was right, not because you expected anything in return. That is rare. That is why I allowed you to help me. But now, it is time to understand the consequences." The weight of her words settled heavily in the air. He realized that their relationship had shifted from caretaker and rescued to something far more complex, a test of integrity, judgment, and character. Her presence was no longer simply a matter of survival. It was a deliberate evaluation of him. He felt a mixture of awe and apprehension, understanding that her intelligence and foresight had placed him in a position he had not anticipated. She continued, her tone steady and precise. "There is a lesson in this, one that cannot be learned from books or stories. Trust must be earned, and mercy carries responsibility. By helping me, you have agreed, knowingly or unknowingly, to participate in a balance of survival that demands awareness. One mistake, one lapse of judgment, and the consequences could be severe, not because I would harm you, but because the desert will test both of us." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. She was not threatening him, but her logic was undeniable. Her approach to life was shaped by years of navigating danger, assessing threats, and controlling her environment. She had applied the same principles to their interaction, and he could see now that her motive had been a subtle but powerful examination of his character. She had allowed him to help her not just out of necessity, but because she needed to see if he was worthy of trust and capable of understanding the delicate balance of responsibility that came with such a choice. The afternoon sun rose higher, casting sharp shadows across the canyon walls. She spoke more about her past, carefully chosen stories that revealed not vulnerability but resilience. She told him about situations where she had relied on her instincts, how she had observed people and places for signs of danger, and how she had learned to act decisively when needed. Every word, every example carried a lesson, not just for survival, but for understanding judgment, patience, and awareness. He realized that her motives were chilling not because they were malicious, but because they were deliberate, precise, and intellectually formidable. She had orchestrated their interactions to teach, test, and evaluate, and he had unwittingly become part of her method. It was a powerful reminder of the complexity of human behavior and the depths of intelligence that could exist in someone who had faced constant challenges. As the day wore on, they returned to the shelter. She moved with the same precision and awareness that had characterized their entire journey together. He could feel her assessing his reactions, his patience, and his understanding of the lessons she had revealed. There was no hostility, only clarity and deliberate evaluation. He began to understand that her presence was both a challenge and a gift, an opportunity to learn from someone whose experience and intellect had been honed by survival itself. That evening, as the sky turned shades of purple and gold, he reflected on what she had revealed. Her motives were no longer mysterious. They were clear, calculated, and purposeful. She had allowed herself to be rescued, not because she needed saving, but because she needed to see if he could act with integrity, patience, and awareness. Her actions had tested him, and in doing so, they had created a bond built not on simple trust, but on mutual recognition of each other's capabilities. As night fell, they sat by the fire in the small shelter. She watched him as he tended to the flames, her gaze steady and intense. He realized that this moment marked a turning point in their relationship. She was no longer simply a figure in need of aid. She was a guide, a teacher, and a force of observation that demanded his full attention and respect. He understood that the days ahead would require careful consideration, awareness, and a deep respect for the intelligence and purpose she embodied. In the quiet of the desert night, he felt both admiration and humility. She had revealed her motives and in doing so had shown him the importance of awareness, judgment, and integrity. He understood that their connection was no longer defined by rescue alone, but by the subtle dynamics of trust, evaluation, and understanding. Her actions were deliberate, her motives clear, and her intelligence formidable. He went to sleep that night with a mixture of awe and anticipation. He knew that the desert would continue to test them both, and that her motives, while no longer mysterious, would shape every interaction to come. He realized that he had been drawn into a complex web of observation, evaluation, and careful decision-making, and that his choices would have meaning beyond the immediate circumstances. The night was quiet, the desert vast and still. He reflected on the lessons she had taught him, both through words and actions. He understood that her chilling motive was not born of malice, but of intellect, experience, and the careful management of trust. She had allowed him to help her to see if he was capable of understanding responsibility, integrity, and the delicate balance of human interaction. And in that understanding, he knew that he had been forever changed. The morning sun broke gently over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and soft pink. He woke to the familiar quiet of the desert, the air dry and cool against his skin. He turned to look at the woman he had rescued, now fully awake and moving with purpose. She was preparing a small area of the shelter for the day's tasks, her movements precise, almost ceremonial. Her presence was calm but commanding, a reminder of the intelligence and discipline that had guided her survival for so long. He watched her for a moment, sensing that today would mark another turning point in their story. The night before, she had revealed her motives, explaining the subtle and deliberate reasons she had allowed him to rescue her. That revelation had changed everything. He no longer saw her as someone simply in need of aid. She was someone who had orchestrated events to test his judgment, patience, and understanding. That knowledge had left him both humbled and alert. He understood now that every choice he made, every action, would carry meaning beyond the immediate moment. After a quiet breakfast, she suggested a walk to a nearby ridge that overlooked the desert valley below. He agreed, curious about what she had noticed and eager to learn more about her perspective. They moved together in silence, the rhythm of their steps in sync with the soft whisper of the wind. She paused occasionally, turning to study him, and he felt the same intense scrutiny that had marked their earlier interactions. It was not a test of dominance, but a measure of understanding and trust, a careful observation that required honesty, patience, and awareness. When they reached the ridge, the view stretched endlessly before them. The desert seemed to go on forever, a landscape both harsh and beautiful. She stood quietly, observing the horizon, then turned to him. "You have learned much in the past days," she said softly. "You have shown patience, awareness, and care. But now comes the most important lesson, one that cannot be taught through words alone." He looked at her, attentive and cautious, wondering what she meant. She began to explain how the desert itself was a teacher. Every decision mattered, every choice had consequences, and every observation could be the difference between survival and failure. She told him that by allowing him to help her, she had been giving him the opportunity to learn this lesson firsthand. "Trust is fragile," she said. "And mercy carries responsibility. You have demonstrated both, but the true test is understanding that actions have consequences beyond intent. The world does not reward good intentions alone, it tests them." He listened carefully, absorbing the weight of her words. The desert had been both their home and their challenge, shaping their interactions and revealing truths about both of them. He realized that their connection had evolved into something deeper than mere survival or companionship. It was now a shared understanding of responsibility, awareness, and respect for life. Her lesson was clear. Surviving together required both intellect and empathy, observation and action. As they descended from the ridge, she remained close, guiding him subtly in ways he could feel but not always see. Her presence was like a shadow of awareness, influencing his choices without forcing them. Every decision became more deliberate, every movement more careful. He noticed how small details, the way he approached a water source, the way he arranged supplies, were being observed, analyzed, and quietly assessed. She had created a situation where his actions mattered, not as commands or orders, but as reflections of his character. Back at the shelter, they worked together to repair a small part of the structure that had been damaged by the wind. She demonstrated methods of reinforcing the walls using natural materials and precise placement. He followed her instructions, learning not only the technique but also the reasoning behind it. Each task carried meaning, each action a lesson in mindfulness, observation, and responsibility. He felt a sense of growing respect, not just for her skills, but for the way she had orchestrated their interactions to reveal the importance of careful thought in every decision. That evening, after their work was done, they sat quietly near the small fire. She watched him as he tended the flames, and he felt the same intensity that had marked their first days together. But this time, it was different. There was no testing or hidden motive, only acknowledgement and shared understanding. She spoke softly, reflecting on her own experiences and the ways the desert had shaped her. He listened closely, realizing that her wisdom was born from years of careful observation, survival, and thoughtful decisions. As night deepened, she asked him to reflect on the past days, on the lessons he had learned, and on the ways he had grown. He considered his actions, the patience he had shown, the care he had taken in his choices, and the respect he had given her independence. He realized that the true test had not been physical survival, but the understanding of responsibility, empathy, and awareness. The desert, she explained, was a mirror of human behavior, reflecting choices, intentions, and consequences. Over the following days, their routine continued, but with a new sense of balance. He acted with deliberate thought, considering each action carefully, while she continued to guide him subtly, offering lessons without overt instruction. Their interactions were marked by mutual respect, awareness, and the understanding that trust and mercy carried responsibility. Each day became a reinforcement of the principles she had revealed, a living lesson in observation, patience, and thoughtful decision-making. Occasionally, she would leave the shelter for short periods, venturing into the desert to gather water, observe wildlife, or simply explore the terrain. Each time, she returned with information, insights, or small resources that reinforced the lessons she had taught. He learned to value not just the physical contribution she made, but the thought and observation behind each action. Her approach was meticulous, deliberate, and deeply instructive, a reminder that survival and understanding required both intelligence and awareness. One afternoon, they encountered a sudden desert storm. Winds whipped across the sand, rattling the shelter and sending small debris into the air. He instinctively took protective measures, securing the structure and guiding her to safety. She observed calmly, offering quiet suggestions and demonstrating methods of reinforcement that he had not yet considered. Together, they navigated the challenge, their actions synchronized by shared experience and mutual respect. The storm passed, leaving a sense of accomplishment and a deeper understanding of each other's strengths. In the days that followed, they shared stories of their past, carefully chosen experiences that revealed not vulnerability, but resilience, intelligence, and awareness. He learned that her survival had been built on careful observation, patience, and thoughtful action, while she learned about his integrity, patience, and empathy. Their connection had transformed from rescuer and rescued to a partnership rooted in understanding, respect, and shared awareness of the delicate balance between choice and consequence. As the sun set on another quiet evening, they sat together near the fire, reflecting on their journey. She spoke of the lessons of the desert, the importance of careful observation, thoughtful decision-making, and the responsibility that comes with trust and mercy. He listened, realizing that her teaching had extended beyond mere survival. It was a profound lesson in life itself, that every choice, no matter how small, carries weight, that trust is fragile but powerful, and that empathy and awareness are as essential as skill and strength. That night, as he lay on his blanket, he felt a sense of clarity he had never experienced before. The woman he had rescued was no longer a mystery, no longer a test he could fail unknowingly. She had revealed her motives, shared her wisdom, and allowed him to learn from her experience. Their connection had become one of mutual understanding, respect, and shared awareness, a bond forged not by circumstance alone, but by deliberate choice, intelligence, and reflection. In the quiet stillness of the desert, he realized the true meaning of what had occurred. Her chilling motive had been not a threat, but a profound lesson. By allowing him to aid her, she had shown him the importance of careful thought, integrity, and responsibility. By revealing her purpose, she had guided him toward a deeper understanding of himself and the world around him. The experience had transformed him, teaching him lessons that would endure long after the desert and the shelter faded from view. The days that followed were marked by calm, shared activity, and quiet reflection. They worked together, learned together, and respected each other's boundaries and independence. The desert remained a harsh and unforgiving place, but within their small space, they had created understanding, awareness, and trust. Each action carried meaning, each decision a reflection of the lessons she had taught. Eventually, the time came when she stood ready to move on. Her strength and resilience had been fully restored, and she was prepared to continue her journey independently. He felt a mixture of admiration and sadness, knowing that their time together had been transformative. She turned to him, her eyes steady and calm. "You have learned what I intended," she said softly. "You have shown patience, awareness, and integrity. Remember these lessons. They will serve you well in the world." With that, she left the shelter and walked into the vast desert, her movements confident and purposeful. He watched her go, feeling the weight of her presence lingering, a reminder of the lessons, challenges, and profound understanding she had imparted. He realized that he had been forever changed by the experience, not simply by aiding her, but by learning from her, understanding her motives, and recognizing the delicate balance of trust, awareness, and responsibility. As the sun set behind the distant hills, he reflected on everything that had occurred. The desert had been both a teacher and a witness, and the woman he had rescued had revealed truths that extended far beyond survival. He had learned that actions matter, that trust is powerful, and that careful observation, empathy, and thoughtful decision-making are essential in life. The experience had transformed him, leaving him wiser, more aware, and profoundly grateful for the lessons he had received.